Good evening, everyone. Glad to see you all. At Jacob, Eastern Medallion Church, and on the other church. Thank you so much for coming and to spend your evening here with us. And we'll be looking at the scientific miracles of the Qur'an. Last time we looked at the issues with the hadith. And we want to thank you, Dr. Powell, for coming all the way from Australia to share his expertise with us. So you know it from the brochure or from this information, so I don't know. Repeat the information. And the other thing I want to mention is that if you like to have information, you can just go here and get it, but you get it in 10 days time. And if you need to use the restroom, it's just not outside, there's a key for you. So without further ado, thank you to Dr. Brown.
Thanks so much for coming out. It's great to have you with us tonight on a very important topic. I've never actually taught on this before. My first degree was in science, chemistry and mathematics was my area. Then I went on to study theology, and then for 20 years lived in the Muslim world in different countries. Learned Arabic, learned to read the Qur'an, and I teach the Qur'an. But this is the first time that I'd actually put this idea together. So I've got some things in there. I'm actually a teacher, I'm not a preacher, and one of the things that teachers love to do is have people ask questions. So what I'm going to do is do a little practice with you. Can everybody raise their right hand? Can you all do that? The lady over there can't do it, obviously. Can you just raise your left hand? Yeah. All right. If at any time you have a question, I want you to shoot your hand up and ask it. If you ask too many questions, I know how to shut you down as well. But just want to have that opportunity so that people can ask questions. So it's a learning together kind of process. So let's just jump into it. So the topic is the scientific miracles in the Qur'an. And if you get a Qur'an from this group, so Sahih International, it's a group that's producing Qur'ans. In the appendix, they have the Qur'an is not a book of science or philosophy, geology, history. It's a revelation from God as guide for mankind. However, if experts from any of the human sciences were to read it, they would conclude beyond doubt that the words of the Qur'an are not from any human being, but from God Almighty. The field of science is no different. The Qur'an contains countless scientific facts which were unknown to man even 100 years ago, and considering it was revealed 1400 years ago, clearly, absolutely proves its divine origin. And Muslims will often put this together as an idea that say, well, this proves that the Qur'an comes from God, from Allah, because it's got scientific information which could never be discovered otherwise, and is now being shown to be clear. Now, this is a relatively recent idea, and the man who was probably the originator and the one who made it most popular was this Dr. Maurice Bucaille, who was a French scientist, a medical doctor. He worked in Saudi Arabia for some years, and while he was there, I think he might have been the physician to the Saudi king, or certainly in the royal household. He started reading the Qur'an, and then he wrote this book called The Bible, the Qur'an and Science. And in it, he says, I think we find in the Qur'an a whole lot of scientific information. I'll let him speak for himself. Have a listen to what he says about it.
Which were equally in advance of the state of knowledge at the time they appeared, and which might be compared to the Quran. There is perhaps no better illustrations on the close links between Islam and science than the Prophet's hadith. اطلب العلم ولو في الصين. Seek after science even in China, which is a veritable invitation to man to enrich his knowledge. More significant, if it is possible, is the famous hadith, Midayul Ulama Abdalu min Dami Shuhada. The scholars think is more precious than the martyr's blood. It comes as no surprise, therefore, to learn that religion and science have always been considered to be twin sisters by Islam, and that today, at a time when science has taken such great strides, they still continue to be associated, and furthermore, certain scientific data are used for the better understanding of the Quranic text.
If you could work out his very thick French accent, he basically quotes two hadith. It says that science and the Quran, or science and religion, are not at odds with each other, but are very much complementary to each other. And he says, and particularly the Quran. And he quotes two hadith. And these are quite well-known hadith. Now my area, my doctoral studies is in the area of hadith studies. And I know these two hadith, but I also know that they're not genuine hadith. They're actually forged hadith. The first one he quotes is called "Seek knowledge as far as China." So "Utlubu bil-ilm wa lo bi-sin." For Muslims in hadith studies, they recognise, or they characterise hadith into four categories. So the top one is one which is called sahih, or authentic. And with this, Muslim scholars would say, we're pretty definite that Muhammad said this. The next one would be, the level below is called hasan, which is good, and they say it's likely that Muhammad said this, but the evidence isn't quite as strong. The third one is da'if, which is, it's reasonably unlikely, he might have said this, reasonably unlikely, we don't have very strong evidence for it, but some people claim that he is. And the fourth one is mawdu', or fabricated. We're pretty definite that Muhammad never said this. Unfortunately, this first hadith that Dr. Bouquet quotes is mawdu'. And we have that from Sheikh al-Berni, who is a very famous hadith scholar who died recently. He says, this is da'if. This is fabricated, this is mawdu'. He makes a list of all of the fake hadith, and he says this one is definitely something Muhammad never said. The second one, the ink of the scholar is holier than the blood of the martyr. Again, we have a couple of Muslim scholars. Al-Khatib al-Baghdadi said, this hadith is not sahih, it is not authentic, it is mawdu', it is fabricated. Imam al-Dhahabi says, its text is fabricated. Al-Albani says, this verdict that is fabricated is what one feels comfortable with. So when Dr. Bouquet starts his talk off about the scientific miracles of the Quran, and he bases it on these two, it makes you wonder how accurate he is with his research. If he can't even get two hadiths right to start off, if he's using fake information, you wonder what the rest of it's going to be like. And a lot of Muslims have raised similar questions to that. Some don't like this approach at all. This is a comment from Muhammad Ghailan, who was born in Saudi Arabia. So he is an Arab from Yemeni and Somali background. Lectures in Islam and science at the Medina Institute in Canada. So a very knowledgeable Muslim scholar doing his PhD at the University of Victoria in Canada in neuroscience. And so he's now addressing this question, and have a listen to what he has to say about it. I'll use several bits from his talk.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خاتم النبيين وإمام المرسلين. There's a topic that comes up again and again, and it seems that Muslims are on this bandwagon at an increasing number, and now it's being used in debates, it's used as a proof, which is this business with the scientific miracles of the Qur'an. You know, this topic is, I know it's a little bit touchy, because there's a lot of Muslims that have a lot invested, emotional investment into this topic. But we have to really just be realistic about this and be a bit objective.
I'm not negating completely that there are some amazing verses in the Qur'an that would make one just kind of take a pause and wonder about how could someone like the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, 1400 years ago, over 1400 years ago, make these statements. I'm not negating that. However, I'd like to turn your attention to something, which is Allah says in Surah Al-Baqarah, يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَهِلَّةِ قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. They ask you about the moon phases. The companions were asking the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, about the moon phases. And their question was, can you tell us how this works? What's going on with the moon phases and how is it functioning and how do they change? And they're asking him for an explanation for a scientific phenomenon, an observational phenomenon, and they're asking for the scientific explanation. So the revelation came down with, قُلْ هِيَ مَوَاقِيتُ لِلنَّاسِ وَالْحَجِّ. Tell them that it is a way for them to determine their time, their months. And so the Qur'an immediately switched their attention from wanting a scientific explanation, wanting it kind of ready-made, let me just tell you how it is, to what it's for. What's the purpose behind this? The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, when he went to Medina, when he migrated to Medina, he noticed that they were doing, the way that they were doing the cross-pollination, it seemed counterintuitive to him, between the date trees. And he wondered, like, he just kind of, what are you guys doing? They understood that to be almost like, oh, you shouldn't be doing this. It's something that they've been doing for years. This is how they did their cross-pollination, this is how they get their dates, their crop every year. Well, that year, they got poor crop. The crop just didn't work out. And they went to the Prophet ﷺ and they asked him, well, what happened? And he said, wow, what's going on? And they said, the dates, they're not, we had a really bad yield this year. And we just noticed that when you came, you were wondering, you showed wonderment at how we were doing our cross-pollination. And his response to them was, أَنْتُمْ أَدْرَى بِأُمُورِ دُنْيَاكُمْ. You know the matters of this world better. In other words, the function of revelation itself and the function of hadith and all these things, it's not to become a textbook, a scientific textbook. There is if you notice, something with a lot of atheists actually, they take their Christian baggage and they apply it to Islam, which is, they're looking for the Qur'an to be a science textbook, which is not its purpose. Now, there are certain verses in the Qur'an, mashallah, amazing choice of words to describe phenomena exactly. But that does not warrant a massive movement to grow out of it. And to basically reduce the Qur'an itself and the message of the Qur'an into just scientific miracles, which is a contradiction in terms, by the way. There's scientific miracles, it's an oxymoron. So, we really have to be careful with this. If you, I'll give you one.
So we'll stop there. We'll come back and have a listen to a little bit more of that later on. But a couple of things that he notes. Firstly, he said one time the people came to Muhammad looking for a scientific explanation of the phases of the moon, and he didn't give it. He took a more utilitarian approach that this is what it's for, rather than explaining this is how it works. And also the story of when the people were doing cross-pollination for the date crops. Muhammad didn't understand it, he wasn't a farmer. They understood it because they were farmers, and when they followed his advice or his suggestion that not to be done, their crops failed. So clearly Muhammad didn't expect to operate in that field. He said to them, you know these things better than I do. So Muhammad wasn't the only one who was recognized, this Muhammad isn't the only one who recognized that science and the Qur'an aren't necessarily as closely linked as what Morris Bourquet would claim. This is Ibn Khaldun, who was a pioneer in historiography, sociology, economics and demography. So he lived in the 14th century, a really important scholar. And he said, the problems of physics are of no interest to us in our religious affairs or in our livelihoods. Therefore, we must leave them alone. Physics must not bother us because it cannot be applied to the two domains that are truly important to us, this life and the life to come. He recognised that there was a disconnect between revelation and research. Again, Abu Ala Maududi, famous Pakistani Muslim thinker of the 20th century, he said, the aim of the Qur'an is to guide man and not to teach nature, study, or history, or philosophy, or any other science or art. It does not concern itself with these latter subjects. So again, you've got some really key, these guys are possibly the standout, amongst the standout figures in their centuries in terms of their understanding of knowledge and philosophy and the scriptures. Maududi wrote a tafsir, a commentary on the Qur'an. And they're saying, you shouldn't be looking for these things. That's not what the book is for. The Qur'an is not written for that. And some people will say, well, when we go to the Qur'an, we actually find some mistakes in it. There's some things in it that don't line up with modern thinking. If you speak Arabic, it's clear that these things don't stand out. And they'll say, for example, there's the teaching that the earth is flat. And the terms that are used in the Quran, where Allah says, we stretched out, and the term in Arabic is madad, and anybody who knows Arabic means to stretch out, he says, like a carpet. So you have your carpet rolled up in the corner and you stretch it out, you lay it flat. It's spread out, farash, like a couch, or firash. Firash is also the Arabic word for a mattress. We made it like a bed set out, spread out, a mahdan. It's a bed or a cradle, mihdanan. It uses the terms of the things that people sleep on, which are flat. Allah made the world a wide expanse, or a bisat. Again, another word for a rug in Arabic. It says the earth is spread out, so it's sutihat. It's a passive verb, like the roof of a building or the deck of a ship or a plain flat surface. That the earth has been spread out. And one day, we're told, the mountains will be removed and the earth will be seen as a levelled plain, barizah. Because the mountains are out of the way, you'll be able to see forever. So people would look at the Arabic and say, well, this is what the teaching is that we find from these words. Another one is about the mountains being pegs holding it in place. So there are pegs in the ground. It says to prevent the earth from moving. The Arabs, of course, were tent dwellers, and they would live in a great big tent, a khayma, and they would stretch the skin or whatever the material was out, and they would have pegs holding it into the ground. They're called anchors. The word for it is rawasi, that you use for a ship, and they're also described as pegs, like boltad, that you would use to hold the tent down. And it says, Allah threw down the mountains on the earth like tent pegs to keep the earth from shaking. You see, there's multiple references there that talk about this kind of perspective. Yep, sure.
You know a thing, how do you explain the satanic verses in the Quran?
All right, okay. I won't talk about the satanic verses because that's a different topic, okay? We can talk about that afterwards. We want to stick to the topic of the scientific verses tonight. Another one is on the skies and the moon and the sun. So the skies are described as a roof or a ceiling, and the word is saqf, the ceiling that you have overhead. They are raised up and they are held up with pillars, so that you cannot see. You're held up without pillars that you can see. So they're held up with pillars that are invisible. The sun and the moon are in every orbit swimming, and this is the word for swimming, yasbah. It's a geometric universe. The sun runs around the earth, and the word there is yajri. And at the end of the day, the sun sets in a muddy pool. So there's a story in Surah 18 of a man who went to the end of the earth to see where the sun set, and he said, I saw the sun setting in a muddy pool. So people look at these things and say, this is a very interesting kind of conception of cosmology, how the earth is constructed. And it was exactly the kind of view that was held in other places. And you can see here the earth in the centre there. It's a flat land with you can see the pillars coming out of it. They're invisible pillars. They're holding up the sky. You've got the ocean around there, the mountains. In the first heavens, there are the stars, and then you have the moon and the Mercury and Venus and the sun, and going up to the seventh heaven. And you also have 7 layers below the earth. And again, the Qur'an speaks about all of these. And then above it all is the throne of God. So this is a kind of a consistent perspective that is presented in the Qur'an, just based on the Arabic teaching. Some Muslims hold to this now, and this is a video clip of a TV debate that took place in Iraq from 2 scientists, one taking the Orthodox Islamic view and another one taking a more modern kind of scientific perspective. Have a listen to what they say.
لحظة أنه وجنة الأرض السماوات والأرض، فهذه دلت على أنه الأرض هي مسطحة.
إن لم تكن الأرض كروية فما هو شكلها؟ أنا عندي ثابت اليوم نتيجة التطور العلمي بالأقمار الصناعية وبالوسائل الحديثة المركبات الفضائية، ثبت أن خاصة بعد أن وجدت مركبات فضائية والمفكات اللي تدور باستمرار حول الأرض واللي غادرت قسم من الأرض إلى المجموعة الشمسية، أكدت الصور الناتجة على أن شكل الأرض كروي. عند سطح البحر عند ظهور السفينة واقترابها لا نشاهد أولا إلا الصاري، وبعد ذلك مقدمة السفينة أو أعلاها ثم تظهر السفينة.
عندما تكون على شاطئ البحر فتشاهد أنت من بعد، لكن على أي بعد منه؟ البعد الوضوحي. فالبعد التلاشي لا ترى فيه شيء، وإن بعدين لما تتقرب السفينة شيئا فشيء نحو الشاطئ أو المرسى فتشاهد من عندها ما ارتفع منها. كيف تشاهدها؟ لأنه العين مثل ما قلنا احنا هي ما توصلوا إلى علم العين جميع الأطباء، لأنه شلون ترى الشيء كروي على بعد بالتلاشي لما تتطلب إلى وضوح الرؤية تشوفها عين. فهذه نفس الطريقة اللي يأتي فيها. فإحنا لما احنا موجودين على الأرض احنا قريبين إلى الأرض، فإحنا إذا نشاهد بنصف العين، يعني العين لو قسمناها بالنص القزحية فنشاهد إلى الأعلى مسافة أكبر وإلى الأسفل مسافة أقل. سنة 99 صارت كسوف الشمس، كسوف كلي. فرحنا إلى الموصل، لأن هناك في الموصل صعدنا إلى دير مار مكي، وهذا يرتفع 3600 قدم عن سطح الأرض. أخذت الشمس أن تختفي شيئا فشيء. وين بالنسبة إلى كتلة القمر؟ لأن القمر الكتلة مالته هو نصف كتلة الشمس، فالقطر ماله 1,200,000 كيلومتر، والشمس القطر مالها 1,400,000 كيلومتر.
الأرقام اللي ذكرها فيما يخص كتلة القمر، احنا بأدلة علمية وبقوانين والاعتماد على قوانين في الفيزياء وعلم الفلك، تمكن العلماء من الاستدلال على كتلة القمر، وهي سدس كتلة الأرض. لذلك قوة الجذب المسلط على الإنسان موجودة على سطح القمر، وهذا ما أكده رواد الفضاء حين انتقالهم إلى سطح القمر. وتأكدنا بأن القمر الكروي كانت الجاذبية قليلة هناك، وهي أقل من جاذبية الأرض ب6 مرات، فلذلك الأوزان هناك تكون 6. الخسوف والكسوف والغروب والشروق وتغير الفصول، كيف تحدث هذه الظواهر والأرض غير كروية على حد تعبيرك؟
الشمس بالنسبة لنا هي اللي تدور حول الأرض، لأنها هي الأصغر من الأرض بموجب الآيات القرآنية. أنت هل يوم من الأيام رأيت الشمس كيف تتحرك؟ أنا رأيتها تتحرك الشمس. كيف؟ تتحرك الشمس حركة واحدة في كل 24 ساعة. لأنه أنا لما أحكي عن علم القرآن فهو يحكي لي عن العلم اللي أنا رافضه أساسا، وهو العلم الحديث اللي يدرسون به، وهذا علم بدع لم يكن له أي حقيقة في القرآن الكريم، لأنه ما توجد أي آية في القرآن ترمز إلى تروية الأرض أو دمارها. فكل شيء اللي ما يرمز إلى شيء في القرآن فهو باطل.
So you can see this is still being debated today, and this guy is an Islamic scholar basing it on the Quranic teaching and happily taking on a person who's got some scientific teaching which he rejects. He said, I categorically reject it. And so it's this choice between, is it based on revelation, based on research, and he's very clearly coming down on which side he wants to. But others would see that there's a lot more in it, and they would say that we can actually find phenomena that are described in the Qur'an, which only now are being recognised in modern science. And here's one which is taken from this the Sahih International Qur'an. It says, the science of modern cosmology indicates that at one time the whole universe was nothing but a cloud of smoke. And they've got some pictures there of stars forming, and they put forward a case on how the earth was formed from this, how the earth and the heavens were formed from this particular cloud of smoke. And then they say this actually concurs with a verse in the Qur'an that then he directed himself to the heaven while it was smoke. And they make the comment, because the earth and the heavens above, the sun, moon, stars, planets, galaxies, have been formed from this same smoke, we conclude that the earth and the heavens were one connected entity. Then out of this homogeneous smoke they formed and separated from each other. So they're putting this phrase from the Qur'an into modern understandings of cosmology. Well, there's a very simple natural explanation about what someone might say, that the heavens were made of smoke, because we know that often clouds look like smoke. And you can see things you're sure, was there a fire happening there, or is this just a cloud? But if we go back to the original verse in the Qur'an, we actually come up with quite a different understanding. It says, do you disbelieve in him who created the earth in 2 days and attribute to him equals? And then he placed on the earth firmly set mountains over its surface, and he blessed it and determined its there and its creatures' sustenance in 4 days. And then he directed himself to the heaven while it was smoke, and said to the earth, come into being willingly or unwillingly. So he creates the earth in 2 days, he fills it up in 4 days, and then goes to the heaven which was made out of smoke, and then he completed the heavens as 7 heavens within 2 days, and made known and inspired in each heaven's command, and adorned it with stars and whatever. So we have a kind of a process by which the earth and the heavens were created. You see, the earth was created first in 2 days, then the earth was filled with all the creatures, all the sustenance. Then the heaven was changed from smoke into the 7 heavens over the last 2 days. One thing to notice, this is the numbering. So this gets the creation of the heavens and the earth in 8 days. Although in many places throughout the Qur'an it says, the Lord your God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and we've got that down there, I think 8 times down in the Qur'an. So there's a bit of a conflict here about how the earth was created, how the heavens were created, and the order in which that was done, and how long it took. Some Muslims have sought advice from Western scholars about how the earth came together. This was a scholar named Dr. Alfred Kroner. He's a world-known geologist, worked at Wittenberg University in Germany, and he's quoted in the back of the Qur'an saying, thinking about where Muhammad came from, I think it's almost impossible that he could have known about things like the common origin of the universe, because scientists have only found this out within the last few years with very complicated and advanced technological methods that this is the case. Somebody who did not know something about nuclear physics 1400 years ago could not be in a position to find out from his own mind that the earth and the heavens have the same origin. So this is quoted in page 107 of that Qur'an. Notice the things that he says. He says, Muhammad could not have known about these things. He doesn't say that Muhammad did know about them. He was just saying it's impossible someone 1400 years ago could have known these things. And he said he could not have been in a position to work these things out. He didn't say that Muhammad did work them out. He just says he wasn't in a position to do that. He's been tracked down recently, and he's questioned about what actually happened for him to make those statements. What was the story? And I think you'll find it's very interesting to see the process by which these words that he put together actually found their way to the back of the Qur'an.
My name is Alfred Kroner. I'm at the University of Mainz in West Germany, and I'm a retired professor of geology.
You were the Alfred Kroner that featured in a video commenting on the Qur'an. This was back in the late 70s or early 80s. Can I ask, what circumstances led to you attending this conference?
Well, there are no special circumstances. This was a professional conference where many foreigners and Arab people were meeting, because it was the first time that a major research project had been undertaken in Saudi Arabia. And the University of Jeddah, that means King Abdullah's university, actually conducted this conference because many of the lecturers and senior students of that university had actually graduated from Britain or other Western European countries, and therefore wanted to show off their results.
Okay, so was it specifically a conference about the Qur'an and religion, or was it a conference about something else?
It had nothing to do whatsoever with religion. It was purely a professional conference on geology. Not a single word was talked about religion or Qur'an or anything.
Okay. What were the circumstances which led you to being presented with religious text and then being asked to comment on it?
Well, during the conference there was an interview in Saudi TV organized by the then Vice President of that particular university. And there were about 5 or 6, I can't remember so well, professors from various European and North American universities that attended this TV interview, and it was there for the first time that we were confronted with these questions. To what extent the Quran was compatible with present-day thinking in earth sciences.
Okay. Your comments were later used to suggest that you thought the Quran contained information which could not have been known by humans at the time without divine revelation. Do you think that this accurately reflects your opinion at the time?
Well, that was not at all the purpose and the discussion that we had. The discussion was, they were reading us certain verses from the Quran, and then they would say, is this compatible with present-day scientific knowledge? In some cases we said yes, because it always is. In almost every religion there's always something that is compatible, and in other cases we say no. So there was never the question whether there was any divine circumstances or anything in this interview.
Did you ever try to have these videos removed from the web?
No. This conference was, I think, in '79, and nothing happened, and this whole thing with the internet actually only came up about maybe 4 years ago or something. I can't even remember. And then somebody sent me a message on the internet, and I replied and said, oh, I'm very surprised, but this is not how it was, and so on. And then continuously more messages came, and then I talked to people in my department. We have a geography department where there's 2 people who are really speaking Arabic, and they're Arabists, as you would call them, and they really know the Arab world extremely well. And I told them about this, and I said, look, there's nothing you can do. You just have to live with this, leave it alone, because we can't advise you to do anything. It will not help.
Finally, may I ask, did you become a
Muslim as a result of this event?
No, I've never been a Muslim before. I've never been a Muslim afterwards.
Okay.
Right, so he puts forward the view, and he's interviewed some 20 years later about what happened at that conference, and he says, this wasn't the question that was put to us. These were, they asked us about different things, we responded, they took out the information that they wanted, presented that as though we were endorsing the Qur'an as a divinely inspired book. And he said that was never the thing that was put forward to us. So I found this with a couple of the other ones. You'll find there's several people who have made claims, and when you go and check later on, that they actually say, well, that wasn't what I was asked. The things that I said were taken out of context, only parts of them were included, and certainly that's nothing that I believe or have ever believed. Another claim that's put out there is the Qur'an on the Big Bang Theory. It says, have those who disbelieve not considered that the heavens and the earth were raq is the word in Arabic, a joint entity, and we separated them, is fatakana them. Then will they not believe? Well, again, let's go back and have a look at what the Arabic text, or what the text says in its context. It says, we separated them and made from water every living thing. The words that are used in Arabic have got a very specific meaning. The word ratqa means something which is sewn up. So it could be like a bit of clothing, or some maybe some furniture or a tent or something, some material. And fataqa is to unstitch them or tear them apart, rip them into pieces. It's not an explosion. There's a very good word in Arabic for explosion, tafajjar or infajar, which means to break something apart or to explode it. When it says when Moses struck the rock, then water erupted out of it. That's where this text is used. It's used 9 times in the Qur'an. It was a known word, but it's not used in this term. This is more about someone sewing something up or ripping it apart. The idea of the separating the two parts, the earth and the heavens, is a biblical idea, and I think this is probably copied from that. God said, let there be a vault between the heavens to separate the water from water, and he made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above it, and it was so. And then he created the great sea creatures and every living thing with which the water teems. So we get this idea of water being a part of the creation, because that's where we see a lot of life happening. Another claim that's put forward is about the 7 layers of the earth. The Qur'an refers to this in Surah 65 verse 12. And in this particular conference that I went to in Melbourne, they had a poster which had been made up, and they go through and they list the 7 layers of the earth, and there they are: the lithosphere, the lithosphere of water, the lithosphere of land, the asthenosphere, the upper mantle, the inner mantle, the outer core, the inner core, and that counts to 7. But in fact, that's only one way of actually classifying the strata of the earth. It depends on which source you go to. Here's one which has only got 4, where they talk about the crust, the mantle, the inner core, and the outer core. Another one has 7. It's got 5. So you've got the upper mantle, the lower mantle, the crust, the upper mantle, lower mantle, outer core, and the inner core. Another one has got 6. You can choose 7 depending on if you're going to break these things up. So it looks like there's 7. But scientists don't universally all agree there are only 7 layers of the earth. It depends on how you're going to classify it. There's a claim about oceanography. It says, we inspired, so we in the Qur'an often refers to Allah. About a quarter of the times where Allah speaks about himself, he uses the first person plural form, we, us, our. It says, we inspired Moses saying, strike the sea with your stick, and it parted, and each separate part of the sea water became like a huge firm mass of a mountain. So this is the story of the crossing of the Red Sea by Moses and the children of Israel as they're escaping from Pharaoh in Egypt. And the comment in the Sahih Qur'an is, actually no, this is from another website called The Miracles of the Qur'an. It says the word idrib, which means strike in verse 63, also means to open, to divide or separate. And this may be a reference to the formation of tsunami waves. Allah knows best. And typically when Muslims use this term, Allah knows best, Allahu Ya'lam, it means that we're not sure about this, but we think this might be right. It says, since tsunami waves cause large amounts of waters to shift and give way to the emergence of earth on shallow grounds, in the time of the prophet Moses, as with the tsunami waves, the waters might have pulled back some hundreds of meters, and this might have caused the parting of the sea. And again, Allah knows best. The problem here is that they're constantly changing the meanings of the words. The word means darab. Darab means hit. If you say darabtak, means I hit you. If I went to the police and said, who darabni, then the policeman know, okay, that's an assault, he hit you. It's a word which is used to apply to disobedient wives in Surah 4 verse 34. It says, if your wives are disobedient, first speak to them, then separate them from the bed and then hit them. And some, particularly modern feminist scholars, claim it means to separate from them, so you kind of divorce or go away from them. But the words seem to change meaning according to the context. And an important one for Christians is this word tawafa, which means to die. It's used 25 times in the Qur'an. It's about something that was alive that then dies. But when they apply it to Jesus and his death, then they say it means to take up to heaven. In Surah 5 verse 170, Jesus says to Allah, Inta tawaffaytani, you caused me to die. In fact, the Chinese version uses that you caused me to die. But sometimes Muslims will happily change the meaning of the translation according to what they want it to mean. Although the Qur'an claims that it is clear and easy to understand, it also says that there are some verses that are ambiguous. So you've got this issue with what does a word mean? And you might remember the story in The Looking Glass where Alice in Wonderland speaks to Humpty Dumpty and he says, when I use a word, it means what I want it to mean. And that's what we find here. She was saying, the words you're saying don't make sense. And he said, well, it's what I want them to mean. That's the important thing. Most postmodernism. Another one is a claim for radar. Again in this website, Miracles of the Qur'an. Assuredly we gave Moses grace from us, saying, O ye hills and birds, echo his psalms of praise. This is, they use Pickthall's translation. Other translations don't use the word echo, they use reply or repeat. And they make the comment, the terms referring to the knowledge given to these prophets in these verses may be a reference to present-day radar technology, which works by the reflection of electromagnetic waves. Allah knows the truth. And again, we're not sure, but this is a guess. The word awibi in Surah, in verse 10, is translated as echoing, and it means the return or reiteration of sound, reminiscent of echo-based radar technology. Radar is a location device used to determine location, speed and direction of mobile or stationary objects and works by reflecting microwave. Okay, that might be true, but this doesn't say anything about that. In fact, again, we have this verse is copied from the Bible. So in Psalm 148, it says, praise the Lord from the earth, you great sea creatures and all the earth, the ocean depths, you mountains and hills, you small creatures and flying birds. And so this idea of people, the calling on nature to sing the praises of God is something that comes out of the Bible and it gets picked up in the Qur'an. The natural world is repeating the praises of God's people. It's nothing to do with this claim of being about radar. Again, this whole question of words in the software called the Islamic Scholar, they have an index down there and they talk about the meanings of some words, and when they get down to the word atoms, they put in brackets, sometimes, or perhaps it meant ants originally. And if you can't distinguish between atoms and ants, you sort of think there's a pretty big gap between those. And of course, atoms Democritus actually talked about atoms in about 500 BC. It wasn't a new idea. It's been around for millennia. But sometimes the Qur'an uses them in a way that refers to ants and mixes the two categories up. So it does raise the whole question of the problem of language. And again, Muhammad Khilani talks about this to us.
I really have to be careful with this. If you, I'll give you one reason why you just can't do this. Science right now, the international language for science is English. Okay. If I were going to write a scientific paper right now, when I write my proposals, when we write our journal articles that we submit, when we make presentations, when we make our statements in English, they're very precise statements. They're not open to interpretation. I'm not going to write a sonnet about describing a scientific, giving a scientific explanation, describing a phenomenon, so that it allows people to have multiple interpretations for it. Now you take the Qur'an itself, the language that it's written in is Arabic. So as soon as you go to English, you're now working with not a translation, you're working with an English interpretation. Because if you look, there's over 30 different English translations to the Qur'an, and the reason for that is because people are using different texts of exegesis, different tafsir. They're coming up with their best understanding, and they're giving you the best way they can explain that verse in English. So automatically, you're not working with the Qur'an anymore. When someone chooses a particular meaning, they've now restricted the multitude of meanings that can come from that verse, and they're presenting that as the one explanation. The problem when you take a scientific, make it into a scientific miracle, you've now restricted that verse into that one meaning, because you're saying science says this, therefore this is what this verse is talking about. This shows ignorance of the Arabic language. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be offensive here, but this shows ignorance of how the Arabic works in the Quran. It also shows ignorance of how science works.
He said that there were 30 English translations. I did a count from my list last night. I came to 106 English translations of the Quran. So there's a lot of material that you can choose from. And he's right that as soon as you do a translation, you've interpreted the verse and you can put it into a whole lot of different ways, and then you lose a lot of the original meaning and the import of the readers, of the writers, the meaning of the writing. I wonder if there's any questions that have come up so far, any things that people have thought about that they'd like to ask. We have a roving microphone, so if you can throw your hand up, that would be helpful. To keep going, but I'll stop periodically and raise the opportunity for questions, or you can put your hand up at any time. So let's move along and look at a few more of these so-called miracles in the Quran. This is the one on the expanding universe, and the verse there in the Quran, written there in the bottom, you see, and the earth we constructed with strength, and indeed we, so again reference to Allah, are its expander. Again, I go back to the Arabic text and I look at what does the Arabic text. The word expander is al-muwassa'in. It means the people who make something spacious. It doesn't necessarily mean to expand it, it just means to make something that is big enough. So the people who made this room made it spacious enough for this many people. And we can get that out of several different verses in the Quran. It says, did we not make the word spacious enough for you? When people were complaining that they didn't have enough land to live in or to work, then Allah refers to it and says, didn't we make the earth spacious enough for you? It says the earth is spacious. It uses the word wasi'atun. And Allah's earth is spacious. If you interpret it the way that these people have interpreted it, it means the earth is expanding. And the word doesn't mean that. It can mean that, but are you going to be consistent in your application to say, does that mean that the universe is expanding and the earth is also expanding? I don't know that there's any scientific evidence for that. And it does raise a question of why is Allah using the plural? The word there, it says we are its expanders, is a plural verb to wasi'in, sorry. So these often raise questions about, well, what do the words mean? And they've taken, as Muhammad Jalani said before, they've taken one meaning of it, and if you're going to follow that one, you've got to be consistent and apply in each case that it occurs.
So just a
Yeah, sure.
quick question.
Yeah.
The gentleman that just spoke,
Yeah.
the neurosurgeon.
Yes.
So he has said these statements in the Quran are not accurate in scientific terms. So how does he view? I mean, do you have any sense that how does he view the word in the Quran in terms of inspiration?
Yeah.
Is he saying some parts you can believe and some parts you wouldn't believe?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, we have a similar kind of response that we would have as Christians to the Bible. We would say, the Bible does not claim to be a science textbook. It doesn't even claim to be an historical textbook. If you want information about history, well, what was the Babylonian Empire like? How big was it? How many kings did it have? What were their names? The Bible isn't the place to go. You'll get some information, but that's not its purpose. Its purpose is to give us salvation history. And so he would take the same view of the Quran. He would say, this is God's word to us, that tells us how we should live as Muslims. It's not a science textbook. If you want that, go to the laboratory.
But we would also say that the Bible is not a scientific textbook, but it doesn't make any statement. I would say it doesn't make any statement which is incompatible with what we know of the universe from scientific exploration or research.
Yeah, and I agree. And in terms of history, people would say, well, archaeologically, how does the Bible stand up with what we know when we look back in history? And again, there's this full compatibility. So I'm with you on that. His issue is that if you take one particular scientific explanation of a verse, like the expanding universe, this is the current one, and he'll talk a little bit more about this, how you actually construct scientific theories. Every scientific theory is simply a theory. It's subject to the next lot of data that comes in, and it will have to change when the data comes in if that data doesn't accord with the previous theory. So yeah, he would take that kind of perspective. I don't think he would see these things as mistakes in the Quran per se, but he would say that people who are making these claims certainly are mistaken.
I mean, I think we would actually go beyond, in some sense, we would say that there are remarkable statements in the Bible. For example, in Job 20 odd, where Job says that he hangs the earth upon nothing.
Yes.
So it's a clear revelation that the earth is not standing on some pillars in some sea, it's suspended.
Yes, certainly. Yeah, thank you. That's good. All right, let's go and look at a few more. So here's another one on the orbital movement of the sun. I talked a little bit about this before. He created the earth and the night and the day, and the sun and the moon, all heavenly bodies in a phallic orbit. It can also mean a heavenly body. It doesn't necessarily have to mean an orbit. And they are swimming, yasbahun. Is it not allowable or possible for the sun to reach the moon, nor does the night overtake the day, but each is in an orbit that is swimming. So the implication of this, as we saw before, is a geocentric Earth. That is, the Earth in this geocentric view of the universe, with the Earth in the centre and the sun and the moon circling around the Earth. And certainly, if you go outside at night time or during the daytime and you see the sun moving across the sky and the moon moving across the sky, that's a reasonable kind of explanation. But Aristarchus of Samos had proposed a heliocentric, that is a sun-centered model of the universe in the 3rd century BC. This was an ancient idea. Again, it was a theoretical concept. He didn't have the information, but he put it up there for that, based on some observations that we have. The movement of the sun and the moon around the earth is found in Surah 9, verse 5. He has subjected the earth and the moon. Each of them runs, and he uses the word yajri for an appointed term. Another one is the claim that about astronomy, that by the heaven furnished with paths. And they look at the word furnished, which is al-hubaki, comes from the word hubake, meaning to weave closely or to knit or bind together. So again, remember before we had the thing of the earth and heaven being stitched up or sewn up, and then later being unstitched or torn apart. Here we've got a similar kind of terminology. The use of this word, the Sahih Qur'an says, represents the current state of scientific knowledge in two aspects. The orbits and the paths in the universe are so dense and intertwined with intersecting paths like threads in a piece of fabric. The description as woven may refer to the string theory of physics. According to this theory, the basic elements of the universe are not point-like particles, but they are interconnected strings. And so he applies a kind of a modern thing, which is again a very theoretical and one of several models that's put out there in terms of the understanding of physics. But there's a more obvious kind of explanation of this. If you go out and if you spend a lot of time out, particularly in the desert at night time where you can see the stars, you'll notice that they follow the same pattern each night. You can spot the stars as they move across the sky, or it's actually as the Earth rotates. You can see that they're grouped in constellations that appear to be connected together. And Ptolemy, writing in 168 AD, described the zodiac in the Almagest. So the observations of astronomy, again, were around for 500 years before, or these ones were around for 500 years before Islam came along. It's not a miracle to talk about the things that people have been observing for hundreds of years. That's just a simple scientific, or a simple human observation. Here's another one. It's on the duality in creation, and they say, exalted is He, that is Allah, who created all pairs from what the earth grows and from themselves and from that which they do not know. So there is, the claim is, the Qur'an had this knowledge about everything in the earth existing in pairs, male and female being present in all elements of the universe. And again, this is a common observation. If you've worked on a farm for a while, you see that there are, you don't even have to work on a farm, there's males and females of animals, and the farmers in Muhammad's time knew that the plants existed in pairs. They knew that the date trees that they had, that there were male date trees and female date trees. And this is the hadith that he mentioned before. It was narrated from Anas that the Prophet passed by some people who were pollinating the palm trees and said, if you do not do that, it might be better. And the crop was a failure. The trees produced bad dates, and then he passed by them and said, what's the matter with your palm trees? And they said, well, you said such and such. You said it might be better if we didn't do this. And then Muhammad replies to them, well, you know better about your worldly affairs. So he didn't get it right. Clearly he wasn't a farmer, he didn't understand trees. The guys who were working there did understand them, and when they followed his advice, then they had to suffer some hunger the next season because their crops failed. We might stop there for a bit. What do you think? It's 8:30. And people get up and have a walk around, and then we'll continue on and pick up a few more things. Alright, we'll continue on. So, people want to wander in and sit down. I'm going to talk about some of the other claims that are put up there, and again, you can find these. There's websites which talk about hundreds of miracles that they find within the Qur'an. Here's one about the death of the sun, and the verse that they use is in Surah 36, verse 38. It says, "And the sun runs to its resting place." And the comment that's made on this, the sun has been emitting heat for about 5 billion years as a result of the constant chemical reactions taking place. At a moment determined by Allah in the future, these will come to an end and the sun will lose all its energy and finally go out. In that context, the above verse may be a reference to the sun's energy one day coming to an end. And scientists have talked about this idea, that the idea of the death of the sun, that at some stage the sun's energy will deplete and it will cease to exist. They talk about the death of the sun. But the verse doesn't actually say that. It says the sun runs to its resting place. What does that mean? Well, fortunately, we have a hadith from the Prophet Muhammad where he once asked a person, "Do you know where the sun goes at the time of sunset?" And the person replied, "Allah and his apostle know better." And Muhammad said, "It goes until it prostrates itself under the throne and takes the permission to rise again." And you can see there a picture of it. So the sun travelling underneath the earth and sitting under the throne of Allah, so you don't see it at night time. And it's permitted, and then the time will become, it's about to prostrate itself, but its prostration will not be accepted, and it will ask permission to go on its course, but it will not be permitted, but it will be ordered to return whence it has come, and so it will rise in the west. And this is the theory in the hadith, that on the final day, the sun will not rise in the east, it will rise in the west. So that it continues going around and around the earth at night time. It spends its time under the throne of Allah, and then it comes out in the morning up in the east. It does its circle again and goes back under the throne at night time. But one day Allah will say, "Go back the other way." So this is the kind of the theory that's put forward about that, which explains why this verse in the Quran, or it's an explanation of this verse in the Quran, the sun goes to its resting place. It's got nothing to do with the chemical degradation or decomposition of the sun, as that website claimed. And Muhammad Gilan raises this again as part of the question of truth. He said there is a real truth issue here that needs to be faced. Let's have a listen to what he has to say. Remember, this man is a teacher in an Islamic college. He's not just somebody who's got a few ideas. He's a man who's done his master's in Islamic theology, in Quranic studies. He's a man who's quite knowledgeable about the Quran and what it teaches, as well as studying neuroscience at university. And this is what he says about the problem of truth.
Because as soon as you start speaking about truth in science, when you're just giving an explanation for a phenomenon, you got a problem. Because we're not dealing with truth, we're dealing with the best possible explanations for the observations that we're seeing here. Now, if someone comes in a few years later, let's say that you've taken a verse and you restricted it to one meaning because of just so that you can make it into a scientific miracle. And then a few years later, someone comes and takes that explanation in science. They're doing their own thing, they're not Muslim, they're just minding their own business, going about their day, going to a lab to prove that explanation wrong, because that's what we do in science. When I go to the lab every day, my job is to basically assert that this group over there and this other group are wrong about how they explain this is actually this way. So let's say someone comes up with a really cool experiment, comes up with a new technique, finds out all this other stuff, and now they're explaining the scientific, giving a different scientific explanation for this phenomenon, and it actually contradicts the one that you used in order for you to come up with this scientific miracle. So now science is establishing a new best explanation that contradicts the one that you've chosen before. And so now what do? You just retreat back and go like, oh, actually it means this, it means that, and this actually can be seen right now with a lot of atheists and ex-Muslims and non-Muslims that want to attack this aspect of the Quran. And they're not attacking the Quran, they're attacking individuals chosen interpretations based on their limited knowledge about how science functions and how the Qur'an is to be interpreted. They're attacking that. But you notice that a lot of them will go like, oh, so you want to just tell me that it's the wrong translation, it's this, and it's almost like a sarcastic, you got nothing to offer. The Qur'an is not a science textbook. This really has to be clear, very clearly made for people. It is not a science textbook. It has certain verses that are very interesting. When I explain the Qur'an, when I'm teaching or whatever, and I'm explaining certain verses, the only time I bring science into the mix is in the way of ishara. I go past by a verse, I say, it's interesting, and I use the Arabic. I just tell them, the Arabic for this word means this and it means that. And it's interesting that right now, as far as we understand it in science, it seems to fit what's being said in the Qur'an. The Qur'an is the absolute. Science is the one that's always changing, and it's relative, depends on how much we find out and all these things. So it's something that we need to be careful of.
So this maybe comes back to that question that you asked earlier about his perception of this. And he says the Qur'an is absolute, it's unchanging, but it's interpreted. And he said some people make the wrong interpretation, and he would challenge them. And he's right about it. In science, theoretically, there's no such thing as a fact in science. There's only phenomena that we observe, and from them we construct theories, and those theories then have to be subject to the next lot of observed phenomena, and we can change the theory. So this would be my concern about if we try to tie the Bible to a certain perspective of the way things are, because the way things are may change in the future. I'll give you an example. When we had our baby boy, our second son was born in Pakistan. Our first son, when he was born, the theory was that when you lay a baby down, you always lay them down on their tummy. Wrap them up tight and lay them down on the tummy. And this was because of preventing cot deaths. Well, when our grandson was born, they said, oh no, they told us not to do that. Now you have to turn them around the other way. The scientific evidence now is that you should have them facing up. Well, might have even got that, which we around the wrong way. Got any pediatricians in here? But the theories change, and it's based on the evidence that has come in, and then they build a theory on that, and then you act according to that, but you always need to hold it kind of loosely because that may disappear, it may change at another time. Are there any questions that have come up so far, like in the break time, things that people had interests or concerns about, things that you wanted an answer to, wanted to raise?
On that level of interpretation, I don't think you could really. I don't think we could really see any ambiguity in the statement in, I think it's Surah 80, where the sun is said to set in a muddy pool, and what's Dur al-Qanaim, Alexander the Great actually witnessed it doing so. He went so far as to see it happen. I think you could really sort of get any ambiguity with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Some people have, so you can actually go onto the Islamic websites and see how they've dealt with that, right? Because they're a little bit embarrassed about it too, that the sun sets in a muddy pool. So you can see those. Yeah, another one here.
Is the Quran written in poetic form or?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so the question is the Quran written in poetic form? This gives us a bit of a clue about what the book is trying to do. Often, when we write, we use a form that suits our goals and the kind of the material. And often if we're talking about things that are concepts and ideas that could be expressed, could be about feelings or whatever, you might write them in a poetic form. If you do that in a science textbook, you would get badly treated by the science community. They'd say, you need to write in very clear prose. So in the early part of the Quran, in the Meccan verses, they are rhyming verses. It's called Sag, and you'll read it through and go da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. So a kind of a recurring pattern with a rhyming end. You can read through the Quran. But later on, in the Medinan verses, it becomes more prosaic, so more prose, and the poetry or the rhyming material disappears. So you've got both kinds of styles in there.
By the comparison, Bible and Quran, which one is more scientific?
Yeah. I'll come back to the point. I don't think either of them set out to be science textbooks. And I know, like, for me, as someone who's got degrees in science and degrees in theology, when I want to get my theological knowledge, I don't go to a science textbook. When I want my, did I get that around the right way? When I get my theological knowledge, I don't go to a science textbook. When I want scientific knowledge, I don't go to the Bible, because I don't believe that it's there for that purpose.
So the problem is that for last 100 years, so-called scientific Christian in science, they try to prove Bible is scientific. But they try to prove lots of things, but look like a myth. And then, on the other hand, the Quran, Muhammad, he's an illiterate. I mean, he cannot read and write. How can he dictate a lot of work? That's a mystery.
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, so the idea, okay, so good point there. And one of my concerns when I look at groups like the creation science movement, I say, you're tying the Bible down to our currently understood scientific phenomena. And be careful, because that might change, and what are you going to do then? That's why I'm a little bit wary about that. You made the question about Muhammad being an illiterate person. Illiterate doesn't mean unintelligent, nor does it mean unable to express themselves properly. Muhammad, there was in the time of Muhammad, there was a highly developed culture of poetry, or we call it poetry. It's rhyming language, and I know Muslims aren't comfortable with that word. But we would see that, and certainly Muhammad spoke in that language with his early revelations, and he didn't use that in later revelations. So it wasn't something that was unusual. Most of the people in Muhammad's time were illiterate. They couldn't read or write. It was quite unusual.
But you explain it in the common sense. But when I know that because you see the archangel, so suddenly he had revelation. Would that be true? Because he's in a cave.
Yes.
And then he lectures. Suddenly he see the archangel, and then suddenly he can to articulate lots of revelation. That's a mystery. Can you explain this?
Yes. Okay. Who says that Muhammad wasn't reciting poetry before that? We don't know. Maybe that's how he always spoke. Again, we don't have any evidence for that. So, I'm not willing to kind of make conclusions based on stuff where we don't have all the evidence in there. Let's keep moving on. So here's another claim about the Qur'an on the origin of life from water. Again, in the Sahih International version of the Qur'an, it says, we have made from water from everything. We have made from water everything. Notice it doesn't say every living thing. And of course, it's not a claim about the origin of biological life. Clearly everything is not made from water. Water's only got two elements in it, hydrogen and oxygen, and we're a carbon-based kind of organism. There's no carbon in water. Clearly everything can't be made from water. Tafsir al-Jalalain, so one of the most important commentators on the Qur'an, so two guys named Jalal, said the heavens and the earth were closed together, and then we parted them. It probably means close together, and then we parted them, and we made the seven heavens and the seven earth, and we looked at that model before. And it says, this is, so how do we explain this verse? So they're trying to come up with an explanation. It says, is it meant that the heaven was parted and began to rain when it did not used to do so, and the earth was parted and it began to produce plants when it did not used to do so? The idea of the heavens separated from the earth, the heavens start to rain, and the earth starts to produce plants, and these are new things. It says, and we made from water, that is, Allah made from water, the water that falls from heaven and it springs from the earth, every living thing. in the way of plants, and otherwise, in other words, what is the cause of such things having life? Will they not then believe? And if you live in the desert, and we lived in some pretty arid countries in our 20 years of living in the Middle East, we saw that when it rained, suddenly the land would become green. Within a week, you would see a land which had just been covered with dust and rock and sand suddenly becomes completely green just from the greenness that happens there. So it's to say that life comes from water is just, again, a simple observation that any person would notice. But there was another thing that was going on. In the ancient times, they believed that the earth consisted of four basic elements that were earth, that is mud or dust, fire, wind and water. And according to the Qur'an and Islamic thinking, the humans were made of earth. Again, we have that biblical idea where the elements that are in the earth are the same as the elements that we find within our bodies. So we've got carbon and nitrogen and zinc and a whole lot of things in our bodies. We can find all of these in the earth. The jinn, that is the spirits, were made from fire. The angels were made from light. And the crawling things, that is the creatures like snakes and lizards and other things, were made from water. And so we've got the four classifications of living things: human, the jinn, the angels, and the crawling creatures. And they're made from the four different elements. So we've got a kind of a system that's built up there, and maybe that's what's related. I don't know. But the idea to say that all of human life was created from H2O is clearly not a scientific statement, and that's very obvious. Here's another one that's brought up again. The Qur'an on the rivers and seas. We've got a verse in the Qur'an which talks about when the two seas meet, there is a barrier between them. And I don't have the reference to that. I don't know. Okay, it will come up soon. And there's an oceanographic observation that when you get water of high salinity and lower salinity mixing together, the water of higher salinity flows underneath the water of lower salinity. And we see that at the Gibraltar Sill, and we see it at different other places. And sometimes the claim is made by Muslims that Jacques Cousteau, the famous diver, the man who invented the scuba tank, it's called, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, scuba, observed this phenomenon, and then he converted to Islam. That's what they say. And you'll find that on, there's a website on the right-hand side which tells you this, that Jacques Cousteau saw this, he read it in the Qur'an, and then he converted to Islam. But someone took the trouble of writing to Jacques Cousteau and saying, did you really convert to Islam? And he's got the letter down there saying, well, the rumour that Jacques Cousteau became a Muslim is not true. He did not become a Muslim, and this is a rumour that passes around without foundation. Jacques Cousteau was a Frenchman, a very committed Catholic, and he was buried with a Roman Catholic funeral, and is buried in a Roman Catholic cemetery. So this idea, and again this claim that is often here is made about that. But where do we get this idea of fresh water or the two seas not mixing together? And here I've got the reference to it. It actually occurs 3 times in the Qur'an. It talks about the two seas, al-Bahrain, and Surah 25, 27 and 55. And it says, the two do not mix. Well, again, a very simple explanation for this. When we lived in the Middle East, often we would go to beach places for holidays, and sometimes we would find a place where there is a freshwater pool not far from the beach, maybe even 50 metres. And I remember one time driving on, we saw a herd of camels sitting there drinking out of this pool, which was only 50 metres from the beach. This was fresh water besides salt water, and the barrier between them was the sand or the earth. We would go camping and we would take water with us because there was a well, and we just dug a big hole and there would be fresh water there, again only about 100 metres from the beach. So the barrier between the fresh water and the salt water is again an observable phenomenon. The Arabs would have known about this. It's not a miracle. And in fact, Job describes this in chapter 38. thousands of years beforehand. Alright, let's look at another one that's commonly brought up. This one's about embryology. We created man from an extract of clay. We made him as a drop in a place of settlement, firmly fixed, and then we made the drop into an alaka, which is a leech or a suspended thing. Then we made the alaka into a mudghah, a chewed substance. And it describes the 4 stages of an embryo. So you've got the implantation, the growth of the ovum on the mother's womb, the development of a suspended thing inside the uterus, and then finally the progress of the fetus. And when you look at these things, you think, well, that's pretty amazing. So we've got the Arabic terms that seem to tie in with the 4 stages of embryology, the development of the embryo in a mother's fetus, in a mother's womb. But in fact, this was nothing new. Galen, writing about 500 years before Muhammad, talked about this. He says, let's take account back to the first conformation of the animal in order to make our account clear, and let us divide the creation of the fetus overall into 4 periods of time. This was around, it had been around for half a millennium. This was not new information. This is something that people had known about. I used to work in an abattoir, so that was one of the jobs that I had, and occasionally when we were cutting up an animal, we might find a fetus inside there, and we could see the stages of the development of the fetus even before it was sheep or cattle, before it had been born. It wasn't an unusual kind of thing, it was natural observation. This is a comment from Dr. Basim Musallam, who's the director of the Centre of Middle Eastern Studies and the Vice Provost of King's College at the University of Cambridge. So he's a man who's the head of a department in Cambridge University. He said, the stages of development which the Qur'an and Hadith established for believers agree perfectly with Galen's scientific account. Hippocrates, Aristotle and Galen were as much a part of Middle Eastern Arabic culture as anything else in it. The view of fetal development in the Quran agreed in detail with Galen's scientific writings. Galen had written them 500 years beforehand. Not new information, it had been around for a long time. Dr. Zaghloul Najjar is a Jordanian professor. And he says the appearance of the word ayn in Arabic hadid is a miracle. He says it's in the verse 26 of chapter 57 of the Quran, and the chapter is called al-hadid, the ayn. And he said this is a miracle because this corresponds with the atomic number of ayn, which is 26, in the periodic table of elements. And if you look at the periodic table of elements, I'm not sure how many there are. I've got any scientific people here that's actually increased since I studied my science. And they've developed 100 and...
It's up to 209.
Oh, it's 209 now. Wow, look at that. Really increasing. And iron is number 26. However, to get this number, he actually has to change the verse numbers in the Quran. If you look at my Quran here, which came from Saudi Arabia, and it's got a stamp on it, as this is an authentic copy from the from the Saudi government. It's in verse 25, it's not in verse 26. He's got a different numbering system. It doesn't count. Of course, the original Qurans had no numbers in them. You just divided it up however you wanted to. So in most Qurans today, it's found in verse 25, not in verse 26. It's not a miracle, it's a mistake. There are different verse numberings in different versions of the Quran and no verse numbers in the original Qurans. So this is again one of the many miracles that are put up there, but I'm sorry, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny. Geology, we might skip past it because I've talked about this one. Let's talk about geriatrics. This is very relevant for me. I'm sitting here on a stool because I've got a sore knee. It says, "Oh my Lord, my bones have gone frail and my head is crowned with white. But in calling on you, my Lord, I have never been disappointed." And the claim in this, again, this website called Miracles of the Quran, this is number 5, and I think they've got a couple of hundred of them. The word to go frail, wahana, means relaxed or weakened or insufficient. And it says the use of this word in the context of aging and Changes taking place in the bones is most wise. Bone scanning performed, taking detailed measurements using modern technology, makes it possible to image the disease known in the medical world as osteoporosis or bone loss. It's a metabolic disease that leads to a loss of bone mass. This isn't what the verse is saying. The verse is saying, when you get old, you break your bones more. When you get old, you get pains in your bones. It's what any old person will tell you. You don't need a divine revelation to tell you this. It doesn't stand up. Here's another one. The ozone layer at the poles as the sun rises. Again, Surah 18. When he reached so this is Dhul al-Qarnayn, probably Alexander the Great, reached the rising of the sun and found it rising on a people to whom we had not given any shelter from it. And the comment here, so this is miracle number 103, the word sitra in verse 90 means cover, shelter, curtain or screen. And the term there, lam najalahu min duniha sitran, describes an environment devoid of any shelter or protection against the sun. In the light of present-day knowledge, this is suggestive of the ozone layer that protects living things against harmful solar rays. The area where the ozone layer is around the sun is the thinnest, and it protects least against solar radiation is in the poles. Of course, if you go to the outback in Australia, and I was there late last year, you will find people who live in places without any shelter. The Aboriginal people would live there. They don't build homes, they just simply sleep under trees. They might put up a bark thing, and they would live like that still. And I think this is what Alexander the Great saw. As he travelled, and he travelled through different parts, he saw people who were nomads, people who lived in very simple dwellings, people who lived in a place which didn't have any shelter in it. Again, not a miracle, it's just an observation. Certainly got nothing to do with the ozone layer. This is a kind of a construct that's been forced onto this verse. Another miracle that's talked about is in the splitting of the moon. In Surah 54, and you have here a picture that's again taken from one of the Islamic websites, talking about the location of the split that extends across the length of the moon. And again, it's an elongated crater, probably from a meteorite that hit it. But in the verse in the Qur'an, it says, the moon is split. Yusuf Ali, who's a famous interpreter of the Qur'an, says there's three possible explanations, and perhaps all three. It may have been a miracle performed by Muhammad in which he split the moon in two in the sight of unbelievers, and there's a hadith which talks about this. He said it might have been the prophetic past tense, which indicates the future moon being split in two, or it may be a metaphorical phrase meaning the matter has become as clear as the moon. He gives three explanations. None of them are kind of consistent with the other. Another guy, Harun Yahya, a Turkish scientist, says the word split here is the word shaka, and he said this goes back to the year 1967 when the Americans landed on the moon and they dug into the moon to get some moon rocks, and so they split the moon. And so this was a prophecy about the Americans landing on the moon. Again, doesn't fit with any of the others. Muhammad Asad is a former Jewish, Hungarian Jew who converted to Islam. He says, it's practically certain that the above Quran verse does not refer to a miracle in the Prophet's time, but rather to a future event. Or it might have been a naturally occurring lunar eclipse in the Prophet's time. So we've got all of these different kinds of miracles, and we can see there's alternative explanations to them which often make more sense, or it's very unclear what the words actually mean. This is now a comment from, again, Muhammad Khalani, who says, well, why are people doing this? What's going on? Why did this scientific miracles in the Quran movement arise? Have a listen to what he has to say.
I think the growth of this movement really has to do with our feeling of defeat as an ummah, that we're not really doing much, we're not
producing the scientific advancements, technological advancements that are being done by non-Muslims and in the West especially. So we feel like we have to assert our position with something. We talk about our past 500 years of golden age of Islam, but we don't want to live in the present. And unfortunately, because we're forced to be in the present, we look around, what we got, not really much to show. So there's this movement that's growing out and it wants to assert like, look, we're great over here, and we figured this out 1400 years ago, and look at you scientists are just figuring it out now. I think we need to take a look back and step back and reflect upon ourselves, and maybe the time being spent to assert all of these so-called miracles in the Qur'an, maybe we should actually be going to the lab and doing actual science. That's just a thought.
So he's pretty dismissive. He says that we're, Muslims are doing this because they realise that scientifically they're not creating very much at the moment. Here is a comment. Let's see if I can jump past this one. I might just skip this one. This is a comment by Dr. Khalid Muntasa, who's a Muslim intellectual. He said, in the scientific world, no new scientific inventions have appeared in the last 500 years. And if you look at Islam's performance on the international scene, so Muslims are about 25% of the world's population. If we look at the hard sciences, chemistry, physics, mathematics and medicine, only 3 Muslims have won prizes in those in science or medicine in the past 115 years. And every one of them left their Muslim countries. So it was Pakistan, Zawalis was from Egypt, and Sankar was from Turkey, when they were in there after they finished their undergraduate studies or before they did that. So only 3 out of 25% of the world's population. And I don't want to crow about my own nation, Australia, but in the same time we have had 13 Nobel Prize winners in the same areas, and we're only 0.3% of the population. Hong Kong, by the way, has got a Nobel Prize winner in, I've forgotten what area it was, chemistry or mathematics was in mathematics, yeah, with only 7 million people. Why is it that a quarter of the world's population you can only get 3 scientific, 3 people who are internationally recognised? When Australia, a small country, we all came from criminals, you know, we were convicts that were sent there. How can you do that? And Hong Kong, this tiny little country, you can produce one. Why is it that the Muslim world is not able to do that? I think it's because the Qur'an does not encourage questions. It says to them, Allah cannot be questioned for his acts, but unbelievers will be questioned for theirs. Do not ask questions about things which you've made plain to you or cause you trouble. Some people before you did ask that, and on that account lost their faith. It's not for a believer, man or woman, that they should have that when Allah has decreed a matter, they should have any option. And they will have no faith until they make you judge in all their disputes, and you accept them with no resistance and accept them with full submission. So this idea of you simply accept what you're being told and you don't question it, you don't challenge it, is a theme that comes out in the Qur'an. And I know we've had Muslim people who've been lived with us in our house, and they've had the same kind of thing. We were never allowed to ask questions when we were growing up. So why do we see, in the Judeo-Christian world, we see scientific development? And I believe it's because we have Jesus as the model. Jesus asked over 300 questions in the Gospels. You read through them, they're fascinating questions. When he was a 12-year-old boy, it says, he was sitting in the temple asking them questions. Jesus is the power of God, and he is the wisdom of God. And he says to us, ask and you will receive. Seek and you'll find. Knock and the door will be open to you. And this attitude of humble activism to say, I don't know the answer to this, but I want to find out, let me ask. It's got really positive outcomes, not only for you as individuals, but also for your whole society, where you create this culture of inquiry. I think is really important. Jesus said, if you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. This is where we see the transformation of individuals, of communities of whole nations because of people who are committing themselves to doing the things that Jesus calls to them. But Jesus didn't act alone. He never put himself out there as, I'm just doing this myself. He said, I can do nothing of myself. I only do what I see my Heavenly Father doing. I only say what my Father has taught me to say. And likewise, we don't act alone. Jesus says to us, I will send the Holy Spirit and he will guide you into all truth. If you want wisdom, if you want knowledge, if you want insight, go to Jesus. He's the source of it. We're not going to find it in a science textbook. We're not going to find it anywhere else but apart from Jesus himself. Jesus is the one who cares for us and who gave his life for us. He's the one who after 3 days rose again. And this is really quite significant. Jesus knew what was going to happen to him, but still he went through it. And sometimes, people will say to me, well, why would Jesus do that? And I said, because he loves you, because he loves me, because he loves everyone. And that's really significant. Through Jesus we can have forgiveness. Forgiveness not only of our sins, but also of our failures, and also of our laziness. We want to take the easy path. We just want to accept what other people have said without questioning. Jesus says, no, take life seriously. Get in there and do the things that will see the transformations of your society. And then Jesus promises us new life. He says, you must be born again. So for every person here in this room, in this country, in this world, the potential of change is open. You cannot be someone who says, well, I can do this all by myself. You cannot do it all by yourself. Science, as great as it is flawed, it's inadequate, it won't pass. Jesus is the one who is able to fulfill every possible need within a human's life. And so I just want to leave that with you as my final message. Turn to Jesus. He's the one who can transform your life, who can change it. He's the one who can bring you into truth and into true knowledge. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Power. Well, we have come to the end of our session tonight, and thank you for coming. I would like to invite you to come back tomorrow night at the same time. Last night we covered the Hadith, today we cover the scientific miracles of the Qur'an. Tomorrow we're going to look at the Qur'an and the Bible, which has been changed, have either been changed or have been changed. So it's going to be another very interesting topic with Dr. Paula. And for any of you who have been here for the first time and the second time, we want to make sure that you feel welcome. And if anybody who's part of the church, you've seen somebody you don't know, make sure they're welcome here. And all that, if you have contact, you need to talk to them, and everything else. But apart from that, have a very good evening. Thank you for coming. Have a good rest and a safe journey home. We'll see you tomorrow night. Thank you so much. Good night.